The Lord be with you. A reading from the Holy Gospel according to John. 6 days before Passover, Jesus came to Bethany, where Lazarus was, whom Jesus had raised from the dead. They gave a dinner for him there, and Martha served, while Lazarus was one of those reclining at table with him. Mary took a liter of costly perfumed oil, made from genuine aromatic nard, and anointed the feet of Jesus, and dried them with her hair. The house was filled with the fragrance of the oil. Then Judas the Iscariot, one of his disciples, and the one who would betray him, said, "Why was this oil not sold for 300 days' wages and given to the poor?" He said this not because he cared about the poor, but because he was a thief and held the money bag and used to steal the contributions. So Jesus said, "Leave her alone. Let her keep this for the day of my burial. You always have the poor with you, but you do not always have me." The large crowd of the Jews found out that he was there and came not only because of him, but also to see Lazarus, whom he had raised from the dead. And the chief priests plotted to kill Lazarus too, because many of the Jews were turning away and believing in Jesus because of him. The Gospel of the Lord. You always have the poor with you, but you do not always have me. A few years ago, I was talking to someone he wasn't Catholic, but his wife was a parishioner at my parish, so she was very devout. And one time I was having a conversation with him about Catholicism, and one of the things he shared with me was how he and his wife had made a trip to Europe and how they had a great experience in Europe. But he said when he went to Rome, he was scandalized by the ornateness of all of the churches and the basilicas and everything else. And in a certain extent, as more of us are beginning to learn and understand, unfortunately, there is a lot of financial corruption in the church, especially at some of the highest levels, unfortunately. And so it's good for him to criticize those things. But I think he was also criticizing the ornateness of the churches and the altars. In some ways, he was repeating the same words of Judas. Why don't we take all of that gold, all of that ornateness, all that money? It could have been given to the poor. And yet Jesus says, you always have the poor with you. You do not always have me. Sometimes in parishes, you guys know that I like to do Mass pretty big, right? I like to have as many servers as I can. I like to have incense at the Masses. And sometimes people will say, Father, don't you think that's a little bit over the top? What do you mean over the top? This is the Lord of the universe. He deserves everything. We need to give him our very best. Go all out with the Mass. Everything for the Lord. Mother Teresa, remember one time she was asked by a documentary maker. He went around the world traveling to different churches and making documentaries about the beautiful churches he attended. And I remember hearing the story about him meeting Mother Teresa. And when he met Mother Teresa, as you know, Mother Teresa she lived a very poor life. She lived with the poorest of the poor, those who were suffering in the streets. She lived a very simple life. They never had showers in the convents with Mother Teresa's sisters. They only took baths with buckets, for example. And so this man who traveled the world on, first-class airplanes and seeing the most beautiful architecture in the world, he was embarrassed when he met Mother Teresa, because he lived such a lavish lifestyle, and yet she lived such a poor lifestyle. And when he met her, her response in meeting him was, "Thank you so much for what you do. There is so much poverty in the world, but the worst poverty is poverty of beauty, poverty of spirit." And so she thanked him for all of his work. We must always avoid this temptation to think of the church as something that needs to be simplified or made more worldly. This is something that took place, unfortunately, in many churches in the 70s and 80s and into the 90s. There were some beautiful churches that, unfortunately, a lot of the ornateness was removed from churches. Some churches were literally whitewashed. Beautiful artwork was painted over with gray and white paint. Statues, high altars were removed from churches because people said, well, we need to make things more simple. We shouldn't have all of these distractions from the essence of what is going on. The temptation in our church that we need to avoid. Last example I'll give here is St. John Vianney. He's the patron saint of all priests in the church. St. John Vianney, like Mother Teresa, lived a very poor lifestyle. All he ate every day, his only thing that he ate was potatoes, baked potatoes. And he wore cassocks that were extremely rugged, and with holes in them. He wore shoes for years on end that the soles were in terrible shape. And I remember when I went to ours as a seminarian, and I got to see the home of St. John Vianney, and I got to see his church. Indeed, I noticed the simplicity of his lifestyle, but I'll never forget walking into the sacristy of his church, and I witnessed the most beautiful vestments I'd ever seen, right? St. John Vianney had the same philosophy. For himself, he lived a very poor and simple lifestyle. But when it came to the Mass, when it came to offering worship to the Lord of the universe, he spent lavishly. He purchased the very best for the Lord. As we prepare for the Holy Triduum this week, I hope that we can keep this in mind as we prepare for these liturgies. We want to make them the very best for the Lord, with intention, with strong prayer and preparation as we prepare to journey with our Lord through his passion.